Willow Creeks was the kind of place people dreamed of calling home. The streets were lined with tall, whispering pines, and every house sat behind carefully tended lawns. It was quiet, peaceful, a place where people waved hello but kept their distance, where secrets stayed hidden as long as you played by the unspoken rules. Grace Thompson had lived here for nearly a decade. At 30, she was known for her bright smile and her impeccable garden, but most of all, she was known as Eric Thompson's wife. Eric, a high-profile lawyer, was rarely home, a man whose absence was excused by success. Grace's days were filled with schedules she kept to herself, cleaning, errands, quiet moments in the garden. But beneath the surface, Grace's world was not what it seemed. The silence in her home grew heavier with each passing day, and her once full life now felt like a hollow shell. The neighbors never noticed the way her laughter felt rehearsed, the way she lingered on her porch long after the sun had set. They didn't see the cracks forming. And then, Ryan Harper came back to Willow Creeks. Ryan was 23, the son of her next-door neighbors, freshly graduated and full of the kind of energy Grace hadn't felt in years. He wasn't supposed to be part of her story, just another face in the neighborhood, someone to wave at across the fence. But one chance meeting changed that. It started with polite conversation, a quick chat by the mailbox, a shared laugh over a misplaced package. There was nothing unusual about it, until there was. What followed wasn't planned. It wasn't something Grace could explain, even to herself. It was a moment of connection that felt impossible to ignore. Willow Creeks, with its quiet streets and unspoken rules, was about to become the backdrop for a story no one could forget. By the time the truth came out, the whispers of what had happened would echo far beyond its borders. Grace's choices would leave the community questioning everything they thought they knew about her, and about themselves. Grace Thompson's home mirrored her life, quiet, orderly, and marked by loneliness. With her husband Eric often away, believing his success was enough, Grace's days passed in silence. She filled her time with chores and the occasional chat with neighbors, but the emptiness grew heavier. Ryan Harper, polite and charming, quickly became a familiar presence in Grace's routine. Their first interaction was a simple compliment on her garden, but his sincerity lingered in Grace's mind. Over time, their exchanges became deliberate. Ryan offered help with groceries or repairs, and their conversations grew longer. For Ryan, Grace was elegant, yet sad, a mystery that drew him in. For Grace, Ryan was attentive, noticing details Eric never did. One afternoon, while rearranging furniture, their hands accidentally touched, sparking a feeling Grace hadn't felt in years. Neither acknowledged it, but their connection deepened. Laughter softened, glances lingered, and the lines between them blurred. For the first time in years, Grace felt seen, and for Ryan, Grace became more than just a neighbor. She became someone he couldn't ignore. What began as fleeting conversations by the fence soon turned into something neither Grace nor Ryan could fully control. Their encounters, once accidental, became planned. Grace would casually water her plants in the afternoon, knowing Ryan would be outside fixing something in his parents' yard. Ryan, in turn, found excuses to linger near her house, offering to help with anything he could. Grace started looking forward to seeing Ryan in a way she hadn't felt about anyone in years. He had a way of making her feel alive, reminding her of the person she had been before her life became a string of routines and lonely nights. One rainy afternoon, Ryan knocked on Grace's door, soaked from head to toe, asking if she had a spare umbrella. She invited him in, offering him a towel and a cup of coffee. As they sat together, the conversation turned more intimate. Ryan asked her about her life, her dreams, and the things that made her happy. No one had asked her those questions in years, and the vulnerability caught her off guard. It was that afternoon that the line between them began to blur. Their conversations grew deeper and intimate. Grace found herself confiding in Ryan in ways she never had with Eric. She told him about the emptiness she felt, about how lonely the house became when the sun went down. Ryan listened with a kind of attention that made her feel valued, even cherished. Their first secret meeting happened by chance, or so they told themselves. Grace was walking her dog in the nearby park when she saw Ryan sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook. He smiled when he saw her, and she felt her heart quicken. They spent over an hour talking, hidden in the quiet corner of the park where no one could see them. After that, their meetings became more deliberate. Grace would text Ryan when Eric was out of town, inviting him over under the pretense of needing help with something. Ryan would sneak out late at night, meeting her in the garage of his parents' house where they could talk without fear of being seen. Each encounter carried a thrill that neither of them could resist. The secrecy, the adrenaline, the stolen moments, it was intoxicating. Grace felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, and Ryan felt like he was part of something forbidden and exhilarating. They began meeting in secluded places, the far end of the park, a quiet hiking trail on the outskirts of town, even an abandoned shed near the beach. Each meeting was a risk, but that only added to the excitement. Grace would laugh at the absurdity of their situations, and Ryan would tease her about her nerves. But beneath the laughter was an unspoken truth. They both knew they were playing with fire. As the days turned into weeks, their connection deepened. Grace found herself checking her phone constantly, waiting for Ryan's messages. Ryan, in turn, became consumed with thoughts of Grace, looking for any excuse to see her again. Their worlds, once so separate, began to revolve around each other. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to hide. The neighbors were always watching, and Grace couldn't shake the feeling that someone might notice, the way Ryan's car lingered near her house, or the way she suddenly seemed to have errands that took her out late at night. Neither of them wanted to think about the consequences. For now, all that mattered was the way Grace's heart raced when Ryan smiled at her, and the way Ryan felt when Grace looked at him like he was the only person in the world. The thrill of their secret encounters soon spilled into Grace and Ryan's lives, consuming their routines. Ryan skipped classes to linger at Grace's house, while Grace lied to friends and canceled plans to spend time with him. Their growing recklessness didn't go unnoticed. Maggie Dawson, the observant neighbor, spotted Ryan slipping into Grace's backyard at odd hours and began sharing her suspicions with others. Whispers spread, and neighbors started watching Grace more closely. Grace ignored the growing tension, consumed by her feelings for Ryan. Meanwhile, Ryan grew careless, parking his car too close and overlooking prying eyes. Maggie noted every misstep, her doubts solidifying. The once thrilling secrecy now felt suffocating. Both sensed the danger, but neither could walk away. They were running out of time, and the consequences were drawing closer. Grace Thompson stood at the edge of her garden, frozen in place, her hands trembling as she adjusted a flower pot that didn't need adjusting. From her position, she could hear the unmistakable voice of Maggie Dawson carrying across the air, like the wind itself had conspired to betray her. "I've seen him there more than once," Maggie said, her voice tinged with a knowing tone. "During the day, when Eric's not home. It's not just a handyman job, trust me. It's something else. Grace's heart sank. She could feel the blood rushing to her ears, drowning out the rest of the conversation. Maggie was speaking to another neighbor, but it felt like she was shouting directly at Grace's front door. That evening, Grace sat alone in her living room, staring at the empty space where Ryan had stood just the night before. She knew what she had to do. The relationship had spiraled out of her control, and the risk was no longer just thrilling, it was dangerous. If Maggie knew, how many others had already noticed? How long before Eric found out? Grace picked up her phone and sent Ryan a text. "Come over tonight. We need to talk." Ryan arrived just after sunset, slipping through the back door like he always did. He looked at Grace and knew immediately that something was wrong. She was standing by the fireplace, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her expression guarded. "What's going on?" Ryan asked, his voice hesitant. Grace took a deep breath, the words catching in her throat. "Ryan, we can't keep doing this. It's over." The room seemed to shrink as the weight of her words settled in. Ryan blinked, as if trying to process what he'd just heard. "What do you mean, it's over?" he said, his voice rising slightly. "It's getting too risky," Grace explained, her tone measured but firm. "People are starting to talk. If Eric finds out, I can't let this destroy my life." Ryan took a step closer, his face a mix of confusion and hurt. "Destroy your life? What about me? Do you think I don't care about what happens to me? You don't get to just throw me away, Grace." "I'm not throwing you away," she said, her voice cracking. "But this was a mistake. It was wrong, and we both knew it." Ryan's emotions boiled over, and his calm demeanor cracked. "A mistake?" he snapped. "That's what I am to you. A mistake. After everything we've been through?" Grace tried to steady her voice, but the tension was palpable. "Ryan, please, don't make this harder than it already is." Ryan began pacing, running his hands through his hair, his frustration evident. "So that's it? You get to decide when this ends, just like that? Do I even matter to you?" Grace stepped toward him, her voice firm but trembling. "Ryan, stop. You're not listening. This isn't about you. It's about everything. It's about my marriage, my life. I can't do this anymore." The argument escalated, their voices rising and overlapping. Ryan moved to block Grace as she tried to walk past him, his desperation taking hold. He grabbed her arm, not hard, but enough to stop her. "You're not leaving me like this," he said, his voice shaking. "Let go of me, Ryan," Grace shouted, trying to pull away. In that moment, everything changed. Ryan, realizing what he was doing, let go abruptly. But Grace, already off balance, stumbled backward. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug, and she fell. The room seemed to freeze as Grace's head struck the corner of the stone fireplace with a sickening thud. The sound echoed through the room, followed by an eerie silence. Ryan stood there, frozen, his chest heaving as he stared at Grace's motionless body. "Grace?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. He rushed to her side, shaking her gently, calling her name. But there was no response. Her eyes stared blankly, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. The warmth of her presence, the life in her voice, was gone. For a moment, Ryan didn't move. He sat there, his hands trembling, his mind racing with panic. Then, as the reality of what had happened set in, he bolted to his feet and fled the house, leaving the door ajar behind him. The living room, once a place of secret laughter and stolen moments, was now heavy with the weight of tragedy. Grace Thompson was gone, and the world she had so carefully built would never be the same again. Ryan Harper fled Grace's home, panic gripping him as he realized what had just happened. He returned to his house, trembling, desperate to make sense of the tragedy. Inside Grace's living room, silence hung heavy. Hours later, Eric Thompson returned home to find his wife's lifeless body near the fireplace. His desperate 911 call brought paramedics and detectives, but it was too late. Grace was gone. The investigation quickly unraveled the truth. Fingerprints on the fireplace and Grace's arm pointed to Ryan. Text messages revealed their affair and Grace's decision to end it that night. Detectives pieced together the events, and suspicion turned to certainty. Ryan was arrested the next day, charged with involuntary manslaughter. The trial that followed captivated the community. Neighbors, including Maggie Dawson, testified about Ryan's frequent visits to Grace's home. Eric's emotional testimony laid bare the heartbreak of discovering Grace's body. The prosecution painted Ryan as reckless, driven by jealousy and desperation. The defense argued it was a tragic accident with no intention of harm. Ryan's mother, Linda, pleaded for leniency, describing her son's remorse and the life-altering consequences of his actions. In the end, the jury found Ryan guilty of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 8. The verdict left a fractured community, grieving over the devastating cost of secrets and forbidden choices. For Eric Thompson, the verdict brought little solace. The loss of Grace left an unfillable void. Unable to bear the memories of their home, he sold it and moved away, seeking peace in a place where no one knew his story. Linda, too, retreated from the life she once knew. The weight of her son's actions and the whispers of the community pushed her into isolation. The once vibrant matriarch faded from view, leaving behind only fragments of the life she'd built in Willow Creeks. In the end, Willow Creeks became a symbol of how one decision could unravel lives. A quiet suburb torn apart by betrayal and tragedy. A reminder of the fragile line between choice and consequence.